as we leave and invade the next committee. Okay, we are live, we are back. For anyone that missed us, we intended to stay here and hear the presentation by the state economist and be able to ask questions, but there was a technical difficulty and we couldn't ask questions from here. So we invaded the appropriations room. We are now back and we are taking up just our first walkthrough of what is a cloud tax and how does it work. And it's, I'll bet you it's been 6, 7, we've never had the opportunity to really take a deep look at it. So we're gonna take a look.
We took this up last time I was on this committee.
Okay, it was quite a while
That's
ago.
quite a while.
Yes, great, thank you. For the record, Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, there is my presentation under my name on the committee webpage. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you wanna, I did just sign into the Zoom so I can have my presentation going at the same time.
Here we go.
Great. So as you just sort of laid the table, this has been an issue for over 10 years. And I do have a bit of legislative history, and some of you have heard me talk about this possibly ad nauseum. Just in the time that I've been in this role, it has been considered, I think, if not every biennium, if not every year, certainly every biennium.
It was a
Some version of it.
favorite of the former chair of Ways and Means.
And it has come over in different forms. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start with what is current law, what is the legislative context that's led to this coming up so frequently. I won't talk about the revenues. I will let JFO talk to that. I will very briefly, or in as much detail as you would like, Madam Chair, go over what was proposed in 2021, because that was a slightly different proposal than what has been considered in the past. But
Yeah, that was probably the most extensive one, right?
yes. So to lay the groundwork for everyone, so we're all on the same page and to refresh your memory, because it has been close to a year now that we've discussed this. This isn't the sales tax. We're talking about cloud tax, but really this is sales tax. Sales tax applies to retail sales of tangible personal property unless there's an exemption. And tangible personal property is defined in statute, and it does specifically apply to pre-written computer software. So tangible means something that you can actually touch or feel, anything that can be perceived by the senses. And you'll see in the second clause of that definition, tangible personal property includes electricity, water, gas, steam, and pre-written computer software. Unlike tangible personal property, I've had this note in that final line: charges for a service are generally not taxable unless they're specifically enumerated. So that's why pre-written computer software is explicitly called out as a type of tangible personal property. And then services, so access to that tangible personal property, are a different question.
And that's where, because if I buy a new computer, they give me a place to go and I download all Microsoft Word, whatever I download, my operating system, I pay a sales tax on that. It is part of the computer purchase. If I go online and use a program, I don't pay sales tax, even though I guess anytime I want, I can go online and use that program.
And that's where we get into it. Still on the first slide, but that's where we get into a lot of the complexity, because subscriptions are subject to sales tax. So Zoom, for example, that was one of the big questions at the beginning of the pandemic. Are we paying sales tax on this? The answer is yes. So subscriptions are slightly different, but that's video. I think it's actually
So we are paying sales tax on Zoom.
Yes, it is taxable.
Senator Bray, then Senator.
I don't know if we've defined it for this particular category. There are programs like Adobe Creative Suite. So you have a subscription, and it gets updated periodically. If you stop paying, it's gone. Is that a taxable? I didn't get a box in the mail.
Right.
I didn't really
So-
download the full product, but I'm still,
We have a list at the end of our presentation. I think Pat has a few, and I think that is one of, I'm not entirely, that's exactly where the need for some clarity and the reason why everything is exempt right now and why the last proposal that you saw would have taxed everything.
Yeah.
As opposed to exempting all computer software that's accessed remotely. But let me continue with this and then we can get to specific types, because part of the challenge of defining these different types of software is the way that they're accessed. So different ways of using them.
even things that are very sort of light, almost everything's happening on a website. You usually download some sort of client software that lets you talk to it.
And that's,
So there's something sitting on your
and
machine.
there's some things that you have written for, that are customized for your business, but it gets very complex. And I think we'll take Senator Brock's question and then we'll let Abby finish.
I'm just in my understanding of some of the things that happen in the software world is that some companies that provided pre-written software previously, like Quicken,
Yes.
are now selling it as a subscription, and it's essentially the same thing, but that would then be treated differently by our law. Is my question.
That's a great question. It depends on the type of service and what is being offered.
Mhm.
And these questions are always hard for me to answer because it really depends on how it's structured. And I do want to just point out, let me just jump to the next slide. We are talking about pre-written computer software. That pre-written part of that is crucial because it's canned off-the-shelf software. It is not customized. That under the current definition is not taxable. So when it's very specifically tailored to an individual's use, that is not taxable under sales. And that's under Vermont sales tax laws, but we are part of the streamlined agreement, which since 2007 has been incorporated into our statute, and we use their definitions that we can have uniformity with other states so that it eases compliance for sellers across the US. One of those definitions is pre-written computer software. I've just included one part of it's actually quite lengthy and goes into detail about it being customized or not. When you get into the subscription question, that is slightly different from what is being considered in this proposal though, because, or sorry, there's no proposal, what was proposed last year and what has been contemplated over the last 10, 12 years, which gets more at when you're only accessing it through the internet. And I can also, I don't have the statute in front of me, I could close this out and get into it, but the Zoom and sort of other TV streaming subscriptions, those are taxed under a different, within the statute that says sales tax plus tangible personal property. There's also I think it's Axio Cable category that applies to those sort of streaming video programming services. So that's slightly different, and it really depends on how both the software is structured and what hesitant to use the word services, but what's being provided to the purchaser.
Okay, I've
That's
got
the extent of the definition.
Senator Chittenden and then Senator Bray, but I really want Abby to get through this. We will.
This, you're right, you're going straight to the heart of the complexity of
You're
it.
finding all the problems. Senator
Not really a
Bray.
conversation.
Just for context, where are other states on cloud tax?
Okay, can we wait until the end of my?
Sure.
I do
It
have a
has
list of
changed
those.
since we first started looking at it 10 years ago.
It's a little over half, and there's a huge variety, and that's part of the messiness of looking at
Yeah.
other states and comparing, is they do it differently. Some do it by statute, some by revenue ruling, some by just guidance, and part of the challenge for me to parse out who does it, how Vermont proposed it last session, is that there are no clear definitions for these types of software and use of software.
And they're probably changing as we write the definitions. Because when we started, I think there were 2 states that had a cloud tax. And it was minimal. We would have been amongst the first. When we took a brief look at it last year, it's up to half. So we're not hanging out there as a kind of an outlier at this point. Because that was the argument, would ruin our competitive stance with other states, because these are the kinds of businesses we're trying to attract.
And how many states now?
It's a little over half, but to different extents.
Yeah.
And I do have a little map towards the end. So I did note that the streamlined agreement does allow member states to exempt pre-written software when it's delivered electronically or by load and leave. That's getting at the downloading, as well as access. So that is for the CAN pre-written computer software. And Vermont does currently have an exemption in place that was enacted by session law. And then I'm just showing this as current law, but then I'll walk you through what led to the enactment of this session law, saying that charges for the right to access remotely pre-written software shall not be considered charges for tangible personal property under that provision that applies sales tax to TPP, tangible personal property. Again, it's only when accessed remotely, so it's only when accessed to the internet.
Well, that would take the example that I used with you, with Quicken, that would put it in that category then. Whereas before, it would be something that you would buy at a Staples or whatever, and you have a disk, you put it in your machine, you load it, and it sits on your machine. But now, if you have pre-written software that is sitting at Quicken, and you access it on your computer by accessing Quicken's computer, that would be that exemption, wouldn't it?
Yes, currently, under current law, not statute, but current law does exempt all access, any charges for the right to access.
If it were just that simple, we probably would have done it. But it seems to get more complex by the year as the uses just multiply and interact. Let's go, there's no question.
So, to summarize, as we just covered, when you purchase a box, which I don't know if that's even available anymore, but when you have the physical media that you are using, Quicken or TurboTax or any of those, that type of pre-written CAN software, that is taxable. If it's downloaded, it's taxable. If it's accessed remotely, it's exempt. How did this end up being the state of the law? In 2010, so it has now been almost 13 years, the Department of Taxes issued a technical bulletin interpreting the law, because there was no session law exemption, as imposing sales tax on pre-written software, irrespective of how it was accessed, purchased in hand or accessed online. The legislature responded by imposing a moratorium on sales tax on that remote access of pre-written computer software, and you allowed refunds for taxes paid between January 1st, 2007 to July 1st, 2013.
And I can't tell you what a painful committee of conference. Janet and I took a walk at midnight and found an agreement. It was long and it was a hard fought. That was the year that it was really thought out.
There were draft regulations or rules, as we now call them, in 2013 and 2014 that were issued. They were just drafts. They were never fully adopted by the department on taxing or exempting remotely accessed pre-written software. In response to that, that's when the session law exemption was enacted in 2015. A few years later, again, that these proposals have continued to be introduced in different forms. Since then, in 2019, the legislature required the department to do outreach and to do education for the technology sector on current law and other potential action that could be taken, repealing the exemption, how that would work for the tech industry in Vermont.
But we did a fair amount of testimony in here at that time.
Correct. And then this is just the most recent proposal, but I did want to point out that's really already, as you already know, it would have repealed the session law exemption, and then it took a different tact up until 2021 when this was proposed as an amendment to S53. The proposals were to repeal the exemption, but only apply sales tax to what's called SaaS, software as a service. This proposal that was made in 2021 was to apply sales and use tax to all forms of software accessed remotely. And from the testimony, the clear intent behind it was to try and deal with the complexities, the way that there's a full exemption now, having full taxation, so on all types of computer software access remotely. That said, there's still been, even as I struggle to define for you how it would be taxed or wouldn't be taxed, there's still some challenges there in terms of what's in and what's out. That said, drafting legislation, drafting statute, while there are constitutional requirements not to be vague, we also want to leave some sort of, you have your intent that it would all be taxable, and then the statute doesn't necessarily lay out every single administrative decision. So there would be potentially discretion left up to the Department of Taxes to fill in those sort of gaps. Again, that's why this has led to so much back and forth over the years to determine what's in and out, also as this industry has been changing greatly over the last few years. The way that the definition was crafted was modeled on Rhode Island law, which was enacted in 2018. Rhode Island is a streamlined member state. And it defined this, it created this new category of taxable sales that would have been within that list of tangible personal property and several sale types of services that are subject to tax. It would have created a definition for vendor-hosted pre-written computer software, which is CAN software accessed through the internet or a vendor-hosted server platform, including where the actual possession of the software is maintained by the vendor or a third party, and that gets at servers held outside of the state. Again, so much is done in the cloud now. I've noted this is not statutory language, but it was aligned to the method of delivery or transfer. It was irrespective of whether access is permanent or temporary, so let's get that subscription question in particular, and irrespective of the basis for the charge for the right of access. It could be per use, per user, per license, subscription, or any other basis. This language was also this part in particular was also modeled on Massachusetts law. They have had recent case law on this, not on this exact issue, but at sort of getting at how to define these types of transactions. And Massachusetts is not a streamlined state, but Washington state is. Because once you start handling definitions, you want to be looking in sales tax, looking to the streamlined agreement for what other states are doing. That is the extent of the legal background, but I did want to point out again, there are not uniform definitions for these types of software as a service. The first is SaaS, software as a service. So these are general categories. Even within the industry, there is no one definition. Platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. Again, all of these are currently exempt under that session law exemption. SaaS is what has in the past been proposed to be taxed. It's slightly more clear where those lines are. It's also known as cloud application services. So a service provider is hosting software applications over the internet, where you get more blending of different types of software are within the platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. The platform as a service containing elements of both infrastructure and SaaS. The platform provides that framework for developers to build on and use to create custom applications.
So is this more like a service where I could create a web page?
List somewhere. No, sorry. That must be in my
But
notes.
don't worry about it. We'll get into this.
Yes, I know, looking to Pat's, I know he has looked into the different types and have actual examples. I'm sorry, it's in the notes of my,
Okay.
so it's more, And then infrastructure is where a service provider owns and maintains the actual hardware, the servers, network components that are supporting a customer's operations. And the customer accesses the actual equipment over the internet, and the customer has more control over the infrastructure. So platform as a service combines both.
Senator McCormick?
Yeah, forgive me, you probably just said the answer to the question I'm gonna ask, and but this is a lot of stuff that's alien to me. Okay, so some things are exempt, some things are not.
Under current statute, everything is exempt, or current session law, everything is exempt. All of these types are exempt because they're not being downloaded or they are not actually being bought in a physical box.
What is the logic by which, but there are other things that are not exempt, right? There are things that are taxed.
For pre-written computer software or other types of software.
Other types of online commerce.
Yes, so for example, the Zoom subscription or streaming subscriptions.
What are the logical criteria by which some things are exempt and some things are not?
It's a great policy question.
What does the decision on a particular case, what does it turn on?
The actual definitions and what categories have been put into statute, but ultimately it's a policy decision as to why one is exempt and one is not.
But is there some rational basis for the policy decision? And there usually is in most cases.
There's certainly statutory purposes. In terms of the legislative intent behind them, I was not personally here. I can look at the statutory purpose for why that is a taxable category if you'd like.
I don't feel so bad now. But
Why it's confusing.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry if I'm confused. It is a, it's a constantly changing and developing area, so it is, that's part of why there's been so much discussion and.
Senator Block.
I'm just remembering the discussions in 2010 and 2012. It wasn't so much why you should tax some things, it's why you should not tax some things. And the why you should not that I heard probably loudest was from software developers in Vermont who were producing products, and they felt that if those things wound up being taxed, they would be a competitive disadvantage with makers or companies like theirs in other states. And so therefore, by leaving it untaxed, they felt that they would have a competitive advantage. That was one thing. The second thing, remember hotels? Hotel software was another
There's
issue.
a whole reservation.
Right, this was, I don't remember the name of the company, it was reservations.com or something Vermont based at the same time, that felt that taxing that kind of software, again, would be tremendously disadvantaged to them as a Vermont employer compared to companies outside the state. And that was what drove a lot of the discussion, at least.
Yeah, but then we heard from bricks and mortar companies who said that having stuff that exists in cyberspace not be taxed when bricks and mortar facilities are.
Yeah.
which then
We didn't really have, that I recall, any companies that were making software programs in a box that had a disk that you put in your computer that you would buy at, Walmart or Staples or wherever. I don't think we had any companies like that were what companies were testifying. So it was a very local, at least that's what I
Whose
heard
computer has a slot to put a disk in?
anymore.
I mean, you can't, you can't do that. Now you just download it. But the basic arguments, again, were economic, that these are the kinds of companies we're trying to attract. Again, when we first gave this in 2012 in that area, we were trying to attract those companies. There were only a few states that had done it. Now, if half the states have done it, that competitive disadvantage is a little less there. But the amount and the kind of software, I mean, then, it was TurboTax and Quicken Books. Those were the two biggies. And we didn't even know about the reservation system till they came and told us. But definitely the world of technology has changed. The world of who taxes what has changed. And if we need to raise money, this just might be a tool in the toolbox.
I'm also realizing because this is a session law extension, there is no statutory purpose. So I can actually point you to a statutory purpose other than the legislative deliberations for the pre-written computer software access remotely.
We want to get out of here before June.
If I may, this is
Okay.
taken from a website that I have verified in the past, most of these states, but again, this is a sort of moving target. It was most recently updated in June 2022. This particular website is trying to inform individuals or businesses that are making sales in the states whether or not they have a tax liability. I do have a chart on the next page where I've done some digging into different state statutes, but again, it's not always statutory. It's sometimes revenue rulings or just guidance. So this does show where SaaS, again, this is the most common category that's taxed. The others, the infrastructure and platform as a service, are less commonly taxed. You'll see Rhode Island does tax SaaS. That again is one of the reasons it was chosen as a model for moving Vermont to taxing different forms of remote access to
So
software.
we could get, Texas is green, that's unusual.
It doesn't have the sales tax.
And we could, no, it has,
They do.
where SACS is taxable.
One,
It's taxable, but it doesn't have a sales tax.
one thing I did note in one of my notes is Alaska only has local sales tax, so Texas may be local. I could check on that for localities as opposed to state. I'm not that familiar with their.
But again, this is a very different landscape than when we looked at it originally. Senator, yes.
So we're seeing this, arguing whether Texas has a sales tax or doesn't have a sales tax, which I was getting sucked into.
Okay.
That's not the issue. The issue is, do we think we ought to tax it, or do we think we shouldn't tax it? And then we can write the language to reflect what we think we ought to do, and not be bound by the language that someone wrote years ago
Right.
that might conflict with what we want to do, or some might be what we want to do.
Right, the map, so,
Why we spend so much time talking about the history of the language instead of what we think would be a good idea to do? That's what sort of gets me.
okay. But this, one of the reasons we haven't done it is the competitive advantage. And that map helps us make a determination.
People have argued to us not to do it for competitive advantage.
Right,
So they'll probably continue to argue
yes,
for
they
us
will,
not to do it for competitive advantage.
right.
So we should simply decide what we think we ought to do.
Well,
and then
that's why
write the
we're
language
looking
to
at
do
the
it.
map.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
And so this is sort of the chart visual for that same map, and I've highlighted this, or bolded the states that are streamlined members. Just to get another visual. There have been some recent changes, again, Rhode Island, just because they're in New England, keep bringing them up because it was fairly recent in 2018 that they did move to tax vendor hosted pre-written computer software. There have been some court cases, for example, in Alabama, their Supreme Court held that all software is tangible personal property and subject to sales tax. No distinctions made between canned or custom. It's maybe not the most pertinent to Vermont because we are bound by the streamlined definitions. But just to show that there has been a fair amount of movement in other states about whether to tax, or some states have moved towards exempting. In some states, for example, Indiana, in the second bullet point, did actually move towards exempting transactions with remote access. So it depends on the state. There has been different policy decisions made depending on the state.
They don't have daylight savings time.
Okay. Senator, some of us have a meeting in 10 minutes and I want to give Patrick a chance to talk. Okay,
So please feel free
okay,
to send me
thank
any
you.
more
That
questions.
helps us understand why we haven't just done it. Patrick, you
Yes.
got numbers? Come on now.
I'm just trying to get into the Zoom right now.
Something tells me this isn't gonna raise $400 million, but
It's always nice to dream.
I know.
Um, So,
Here we go.
all right, so Patrick Turgeon, Joint Fiscal Office. Abby and I actually have a couple of duplicate slides, so I think we can move through this
Okay.
somewhat quickly. Abby went over this already. This
Yeah.
is just defining the different products. And then there was a question you had raised just about some examples of what each one could be. So I think your question was about the platform as a service, and a lot of that's website hosting. What do you want the background of your website to look like? Where do you want people to click and all that?
We'll get into this a lot.
Yeah.
In a
So
lot more detail.
Nice, just clicking ahead. One thing that I want to sort of stress is that this market's been growing a lot. Even just since I've been here. So this chart here, it's inclusive of everything in the prepackaged software world, which the subcategory we're talking about here is a part of those programs that are accessed remotely. So I think this is maybe something we can get into at a later date, but this is sort of a list of questions of when and when is it not potentially taxable, and in what instances is due or do you not have to pay it. So this is our number for our estimate for this year. I guess just to provide a little context, in May of 21, it was about 11 million. Last year in May, it was about 16.8, and this year, we're, just from the new data I've looked at, bumping it about 10% up to 18.4. A little hard to say how much it's going to continue growing because it's been growing at such a rapid pace recently.
I'm
So
sure COVID,
I'm sure that contributed, yeah.
yeah, you strap home with your computer.
Yeah.
Senator Brown.
So quick question, is there any breakdown as to who pays that revenue? Is it individuals, is it consumers, or is it businesses in terms of the breakdown?
Yeah, so we kind of poked around, and it looks like the general breakdown is in the industry is about 61% of purchases of this kind are made by businesses, and the remaining 39 or 40 is by consumers. And so we looked at a lot of different information on this. And one thing that I want to stress a little bit is that our estimate might still be evolving a little bit, and that's because we have some states that have recently implemented and actually are collecting data on how much they're raising from this tax. One example is Colorado recently made this type of software taxable, and what they did that's interesting is on receipts they're actually breaking out regular sales tax and the sales tax collected on cloud purchases.
Oh.
So I'm hoping to get in touch with some people out there to sort of nitpick and see how
Yeah,
reliable that data has been for them. But that would be great to sort of have some more hard data to be able to incorporate into this. Currently, we are looking at Chicago, which we have hard data for, but we are sort of scaling from a market down into sort of
yeah.
a national market
Chicago
down
is,
into a
yeah.
Vermont market for the most part.
Senator Chin.
I think I heard Abby say that the majority of states that have implemented a cloud tax did it on just SaaS, not PaaS and IaaS. I didn't see in your slide whether or not this also includes platform as a service and infrastructure as a service.
This estimate includes all three. Yeah.
You have it broken out by what just SaaS would be in order if we were to consider this further and how it would compare to the other states.
I don't have it on me, but I'd be happy to, it's in the model. I just don't know the number off the top of my head.
Okay.
I mean, similarly, maybe, sorry if this was already answered, but this is anecdotal, it feels like they're starting to converge, you know, I mean, that, even then, we had a hard time distinguishing between when something is like a platform and when it's software. That, you know, you have like Microsoft Suite now also has storage capacity and, you know, things like that. I mean,
My general impression is that software as a service is more often consumed by individual consumers. When you look at a platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, it's more often going to be smaller businesses or even enterprises. You don't get as much over the counter, so to speak, requests of those things. It's a small startup. I don't know if that's a factor in our policy consideration, but
We will, that's why we're taking the time, because we're gonna have time now, I hope, to really dig into it. MailChimp.
and can I,
and Salesforce is teaming up with Walmart. I heard this morning on the news. So.
Okay, Sandra Chin.
the point of consumption is who is taxed. So if
Right.
a Vermont provider provides this to a state that doesn't have this, the tax is not incurred. It's only when a Vermont consumer is, if this were in place, would be paying
Right,
for the
so
service.
I'm looking at Abby when I say this, but it's sort of the rule of thumb would be location of consumption.
Yes, so, sorry, I probably should have made that point. If there is an individual making, or a business making a sale into Rhode Island, that would be a tax, that would be taxable there. If, an individual is purchasing in a state, and having it delivered to Vermont, it would be subject to Vermont's laws.
Which was an argument against it would be so difficult for us to set it up because you're already paying it in
Right.
25 plus or minus states.
So, sorry, where is storage? Where does storage fall?
So that should fall under the infrastructure as a service, so your Amazon Web Services.
Right.
Stuff is your.
Because that feels like for Google, it's trying to be in every market. So it feels like the more you use their software, the more they want to give you storage attached to that then costs money. That's where they're getting their money. So they might have free software as a service, and then you're paying for the infrastructure.
I got a great visual that breaks out the difference between these three
Yeah.
and where the virtualization layer is. If you'd like me to bring it up sometime, I'd be glad
yeah.
to do that.
They share it with Joint Fiscal and Abby, yes.
I often feel like I've been virtualized.
Okay, let's go.
That's all my slides, actually.
That's it.
Yeah, I knew we were gonna keep it short and sweet today.
We get
Just
to
a primer.
take the trip across the hall again.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we tax everything, it's nowhere near $200 million. But that just lets us know what's out there.
Yeah.
And if we take it back, which I have a feeling there's a good chance we will, just because we're new at it and we frequently compromise, we would be back below that. So, yeah. So we'll see where that goes. All right. But we're gonna look into a lot of this because I have a feeling that if some of the other bills make it through, they will hit here like the day before crossover. Or the day before the end of the session or the week before, and we will be knocking out 5 bills a day. So we need to have all of this down pat. All right.
I guess one last question. I might have missed this too, but did we see how much revenue we've lost because people are just not purchasing
software from a shelf or?
Well, I guess in a way, our estimates in the past years can kind of be used to say what the lost revenue is. I think I mentioned in 21, it was about $11 million was the estimate. And last year we were saying 16.8. So in a way, that 18.4 that you're seeing there is sort of, you can kind of think of it. It's odd because it's not really like a traditional tax expenditure.
Right.
But you know, our estimate of what you would raise, I guess you can kind of think of in that way.
Yeah, I just didn't know if like, obviously buying something at Staples in a box it's like plummeted,
You
know?
can't even put it in your computer.
yeah, right,
You get a card now that gives you a website
Right,
to download.
Right, so that's nothing,
Yeah.
that's like,
If you download it, we get paid. So
Right.
if you were buying Quicken and you got the card and you downloaded it onto your computer, we get paid. If you say, I'm going to use the Quicken platform, I'm not sure what, you're gonna use Quicken in the cloud,
right,
then we don't
if
get
you have a login
paid.
instead of it.
Right, you just log in.
Yeah.
And then there's subscriptions and
Right.
I mean, it's growing
Yeah.
and it's changing. I mean, it's huge. So we need to at least understand where we are now, then we will have a better foundation to understand where we are next year.
It's not taxable now.
It is not taxable.
That's where we are.
Right,
And at one point, the administration did not do the cloud tax. And it was set to expire. The session law that said, it was up there, it was set to expire in 2013, and that was part of the deal, that I wouldn't enact any law, any extension of that. And I said, I won't on my own, but I can't guarantee what everybody else will do. It was a very contentious to it, and the administration did not support it, and the new tax commissioner the next year, I believe, said she couldn't enact it if we did it, because she couldn't tell what was or what wasn't. And it just basically died there. But the House has tried to bring it back. And again, it's really been an economic development argument. And it was harder last time to get people to come in. So, especially you folks in Chittenden County, if you know anybody that's, works on any of these kinds of computer things, and we had a bunch from the hospitality industry.
or like Utopia.
Yes, with the reservations. So we will see where that goes. Okay, some of us are due across the hall
Oh, yeah.
2 minutes ago.
We're right on time.
We're right on time. Okay, these
My-
clocks are
yeah.
never the same. And everybody else, we'll see you tomorrow. Hopefully, we will not have an evacuation or an invasion, and we'll be able to stay in our room and talk about the child care study. And again, our role in that will be how we pay for it. Oh, yeah, I know.
We get the easy one.
I'm sure there's money around somewhere.
Oh, I know. Daddy Warbucks is just there.
We're